Good. So welcome everyone for the tryScrum's webinar series 11, powered by tryScrum Studio in partnership with Scrum Master Studio. Today we have a very good topic. It's retrospectives, underloved improvement tool, right? So I love this concept of empiricism. Scrum is being founded on it, right? So in all the other events in Scrum, we try to inspect and adapt an artifact. Whereas it's a little different in retrospectives, you're trying to inspect and adapt the people and relationships. Now, Mark feels that it could be an underloved improvement tool. Let's hear it from him. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Arun. So first of all, we should probably check, do I actually have any credentials worth talking about?
Sure.
Yeah, it turns out I've been...
Sorry to set up. So before I hand it over to you, I'll just finish off the tech setup, logistics, and then I can hand it over to you formally.
I apologize.
No problem. So the tech setup, usually all microphones would be muted. All your questions would be posted in the Q&A window, but we may today have some interactions with Mark coming up, Mark requesting to have some interactions. We'll try to accommodate based on the flow that we go in the webinar. Right, that's on the tech setup. About tryScrum, our mission is to humanize organizations, and we are a PTN network partner of Scrum.org and an ICAGL authorized instructor our organization, and also we do offer CAL educator programs from Scrum Alliance, and also we offer Management 3.0 programs. That's about us. And we run 3 studios, one for the people, Scrum Master Studio, then for the product owner studio, and for the leaders, we run Agile Leadership Studio. That's about us. Before not taking so much of time, I'll introduce our speaker for today, Mark Levision. He's an author, and he's a consultant, and he is a certified Scrum Trainer from Scrum Alliance. Right. Mark Levision comes up with around 30 years of experience in the IT industry, working as a developer, manager, technical lead, architect, and as a consultant. That's quite a number of roles. Right. So he has varied experiences. Let's get some part of the wisdom from him today. And Mark is an author, as I said, and he has written an ebook, 5 Steps Towards Creating High-Performance Teams, and is currently writing on effective Agile retrospectives. And he has written dozens of articles and blogs, and you can refer in the internet. Good. So over to you, Mark. Welcome again.
Thank you. So it's a funny thing, you said very early on, Scrum builds retrospectives in, and that's actually true today. But if you had been around at the beginning of time, and don't worry, you don't want that much gray hair, but had you actually been around at the beginning of Scrum time, you would have discovered that retrospectives were not built into Scrum. They got added, I'm good, somebody will correct me out there. I'm thinking it was around 2002 that they were formally added to Scrum. Up until that time, the creators of Scrum, Ken and Jeff, had just assumed everybody was making some systemic efforts to improve their teams. There had already in the Agile community been a movement to take the idea of retrospectives, which was the work of our early project management guy, Norman Kurth. And there had been this work to bring the retrospectives into the Agile community. Jeff and Ken added them to Scrum, realizing that teams were actually not systemically improving in Scrum. So retrospectives, many of us love retrospectives, but retrospectives were, shall we say, the late stepchild to the game of Scrum. It was a little too focused too early on better product. We just assume your team improvement is happening automatically. Fast forward, what has it been? It's been probably 18 to 20 years since retrospectives got added to the Scrum Guide. And I still find problems. So you'd think a practice that had been 18 to 20 years old, it'd be old hat by now. We do it so well that there'd be no truck in writing blog posts on it. Ebooks would be boring. Everybody would know this stuff and it would be commonplace. Yeah, problem shows up time and time again. You get called into a place allegedly doing Scrum. And one of my first questions is, tell me the last 3 things you've improved in a retrospective. Or tell me the last 3 things you've improved from a retrospective. In fact, that might be fun. For fun, in the Q&A channel or in the chat channel, I think it's the Q&A channel our friend Arun has left open for you. In the Q&A channel, how many of you can type in the last 3 things your team have improved from a retrospective? And we'll see how many of these things actually show up. If you can actually type in doesn't matter if it's a detailed response. If you remember anything, you're a winner.
Okay. You can even type in the chat as well. You would have options in the chat as well as in the Q&A window.
Yeah, and I'll keep them both open in front of me so that I can see. If you toss stuff into the chat or the Q&A, we can actually see whether or not you've had luck improving things in your retrospectives. So I'm interested in what happens. I'm interested in why do teams not honor their retrospectives in the way that we might think they should? Because, I'm a Scrum guy. I want to help. And I find that teams aren't doing quite what they'd need to. So I'm finding a bunch of patterns. I found patterns like there's a lack of trust inside the team. Monotonous retrospectives. Yes, okay. Namesake retrospectives. Okay, that's another good one. Okay. So those are some. There's lack of trust is another good one. I've seen one team recently where psychological safety had been destroyed outside of the retrospective. And since psychological safety had gone, people were no longer open to discussing inside the retrospective their pain. Okay. I've seen people suffer from the anti-pattern. Has anybody ever seen the anti-pattern called "Nothing Ever Gets Better Around Here"? Sprint backlog stability destroyed your retrospective. Yes, it was unstable, so you used your retrospective as a buffer to recover when things went badly wrong. Right? Subtle hint, my wonderful friend. When that happens, if anything, what you really want to do is put a fence around the retrospective, protect it so you can diagnose what went wrong in the sprint. Okay. So I look at, I think of myself as a doctor, but not a doctor in the pill sense. A doctor who prescribes exercise to people and says, keep trying, keep doing your exercises. So when I see the sprint retrospective as your diagnostic tool. So when something happens that your retrospectives lose interest, you're losing access to your diagnostic tool. So Arun hinted that I'm in the middle of writing an ebook. If you're interested, it won't be rocket science to go find my website. I'm agilepainrelief.com. I don't imagine that's a tough thing to find. Okay. It's not published yet, so don't worry, you're not missing anything right now. The first third of the ebook is, for God's sakes, please vary your retrospectives up. Now, you don't actually need me for that. There's a fairly famous website out there. I suspect Arun will throw it in the chat in just a few seconds. It's called retromat.org. Coolest website ever for retrospectives. They have I think it's 139 different retrospective styles or flavors. And here's the best part. Every time you visit the homepage, the Retromat changes what it's showing you. So you have to adapt to a new style. Okay. So that's the easy stuff. So Retromat will give you lots and lots of styles of retrospectives. But so congratulations, you've become better. You're running retrospectives that aren't boring. Have you considered that every time you run a retrospective, you have another problem at hand? Every time you run a retrospective, you actually have to ask, are the activities I have designed today, are they going to meet the needs of the humans I have available and the problems my team faced? Have any of you had a sprint where some stories got finished or some product backlog items got finished and they went easy and it was smooth and it was golden, and some kind of killed the team. You might benefit from running an exercise called the Story Oscars. I remember that one because I've run it recently with a client. The Story Oscars gets people to nominate user stories that were good and deserve to be examined for sainthood. And it also gets us to examine a user story or two that went deeply, badly wrong so that we can learn the lessons from that story. After all, who doesn't love watching an Oscars ceremony? I hope you see what I really try to do is inject a little bit of humor into my work. What works for you and your team will be a different game. Okay. Some other ones you might try for monotony, and I just pulled these up on the fly. I've run a recent workshop, so I'm going to do a screen share for a couple I've run in a recent workshop. So I hope the workshop attendees forgive me. They didn't know that their material, their ideas were so. In sprint 1, I get my attendees to do a Starfish retrospective. So here's the crazy idea. I run my workshops I give my workshop attendees 10-minute sprints to build me a product. In 10 minutes, they're expected to build me a storybook of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Okay, what were their results? Well, in Starfish, you figure out things you'd like to do more of and less of. What you want to keep doing, start doing, and stop doing. So this team, it turns out, had done a lot of work, and they didn't actually talk to their product owner before declaring it accepted. So that's a stop doing. I won't belabor the point. They used it to diagnose themselves, and then in the next sprint, we moved to a different tool, the sailboat retrospective. Now, I don't think that either of these tools are miraculous. I don't think that any of these tools are going to save a retrospective going downhill if the Scrum Master is not reading the energy in the room and selecting the tool that meets the team's needs. Okay. Now, for fun, it would actually be cool if in the chat or perhaps in the Q&A, if people started throwing up problems they've been suffering in their retrospectives, because it's going to get pretty dry pretty fast if I keep on talking at you. In workshops, we have a rule. In workshops, the instructor should never speak to the victims in the room for more than about 5 to 7 minutes at a time. Okay? So one of our amazing friends says, team is disinterested. And somebody else, engagement is tough, especially in a remote retro, okay? So let's consider, why might your team be disinterested in the retrospective? We could have boring retrospective. I hope our friend, the Retromat, saved that. And somebody says the retroactive, okay. Somebody said the Retromat isn't working. So Arun, could you visit the Retromat site to make sure it still works?
Sure, I can do that.
Thank you. So engagement is low because there are no actions coming out of the retrospectives, or all retrospectives are the same. And its other close friend is we wrote one action item and it didn't get fixed last sprint, and so now we're bored. Have any of you tried making your action, whose actions are like, we should write some more unit tests? Or we should do better automated testing? Are actions like that going to get concrete behavior out of people? So I like my actions to be more crisp. I like my actions in retrospectives to be designed as experiments. I'd actually be cool if the only outcome from each retrospective was a single experiment. Anyways, DT is going to do all work. Yeah, so somebody, yes, no, what, who, what, when actions. Well, your actions, if you're doing who, what, when actions, you seem to be better than many. DT is going to do all work. I'm sorry, I don't know DT personally, so I don't know who DT is to do all the work.
It's development team. So I thought why the
Dev
retrospectives
team.
aren't.
Got it.
Yeah.
DT is not an acronym. So DT may be currently in an acronym in India. It's not yet in an acronym in Canada.
Okay.
Of course, I shouldn't assume all of my friends are currently sitting in India either. I found it very useful for the development team to actually design experiments towards the improving in the next sprint. So I'll take a risk and I'm going to do a screen share on the PDF for our as yet unreleased ebook. I'm not trying to get you to register for my website. Don't worry, it's not spammy or anything like that. So I've taken an idea from a friend of mine. A guy named Robin Diamond has an experiment template for improvement stories. So the idea is you say something like this: in order to solve problem X, as a development team member or Scrum Master or product owner, I want to make improvement X. We know we've improved when, and then he gives you a measure, and you measure from the current state to the target state. I'm going to make the assumption that we're all mature enough to know that story points is probably the worst measure in the world. Okay. Oh, and if you've never seen the improvement story template before, I have it on my website in a couple of places. Two, the guy who invented it, improvement story template. If you search for Innovel, Robin Diamond has improvement story templates on his website. If you have measures that aren't story points, I'm assuming that if you make some small improvement, you will, a few sprints later, be able to see the effect of the improvement on the system. So instead of I want to do better instead of more unit testing, why not something like this? In order to reduce the number of defects, let's assume unit testing reduce defects. In order to reduce the number of defects, as a Scrum Master, or no, as a dev team member, I guess it'll be a dev team member. As a dev team member, I want to write at least 3 unit tests per new class. We know we've improved when our defect rate goes from 5 escaped defects per sprint to 3 defects per sprint. It's not a very good one. Okay. How else might I measure the improvement of unit test? Somebody else want to take a stab? How else might unit tests help you improve? How might you measure it? Okay, perhaps not. Okay, related to using my friend's experiment, my improvement template. So it might reduce the bugs reducing the bugs being identified. Okay, I agree. Less cost in back and forth with coding and testing. Great. So our friend then assumes that if we have better unit tests, it will take us less time to get a story built to finished. Is this correct? And also build testable code. I agree. But therefore, so we all know that it takes time to learn a new habit. So therefore, we might bet that in 8 weeks' time, if we did better work with unit testing, 8, maybe 10 weeks, we would expect to see a reduction in the cycle time. Do we all know what cycle time is? Okay. For those who don't know, cycle time is how long it takes to get a work item from the state of not started to the state of finished. And if we did that, then we would, so the unit test might help with quality in measuring defect rates, and the unit tests might also help in reducing how long it takes to get things done. Okay. I don't yet know how to measure testable code, although I am very much in agreement with the person that unit tests aid you in creating more testable code. Another trick that I find very useful, but you have to use it very carefully, is I'm a big fan of collecting data. If you add data to your retrospectives, they can be a whole lot more effective. So I'm going to give you some pictures to give you some ideas. I'm assuming by now most people in the Agile world are familiar with your nice, boring, plain Jane cumulative flow diagram. So we got one here. Can you see that you could use, now it's a tad messy, I agree, because it's meant to show a point. Could you use this, could you use a cumulative flow diagram in your retrospective to spark a conversation with your team? I think that this cumulative flow diagram shows that work is moved to the common product backlog en masse. I can see that there's a batch improvement process, there's a batch approval process in my system. And I can see I've got a massive column called test, which tells me that there's something not going, we don't have good development testing relations, and so we should probably break down some barriers there. Okay. Next up, I might use cycle time. Now, cycle time's a crazy one. This is actually real data from my real company. I've measured how long it takes for tasks to get done inside my company, and I'm interested in which tasks took longer. Now, the difference between me and the rest of you guys is my tiny little company isn't producing software. My tiny little company, so Scrum doesn't really apply to us because we're not committing to work every 2 weeks. We don't have a product we're delivering. We're delivering educational experiences. But even for me, I look at this outlier up here and I wonder, well, why did this take so much? Why did this take 30 days when most other things take 4 to 5 days? And then we use that in the conversation with my team. So retrospectives are better with data. Okay. I'm killing my screen share. So somebody else, somebody has already said in the chat, yes, the CFD helps understand the bottlenecks and the ways of working towards an increment. Yes, that's brilliant. So if you understand the CFD, then you're probably ready to spin up on thinking about cycle time and using things like cycle time scatter plots and other data tools. There's a caveat here. Please don't use data as a weapon against your team. Please use data as a tool to help your team have a better understanding of themselves. Now, somebody's asked in the Q&A, what was my best experience I've had as a facilitator? And it's funny, you'd think that the best, on the one hand, I'd love to say the best experiences are the ones where the retrospectives went smoothly. But then they probably didn't need me. If the retrospective went reasonably well and the team was already reasonably high functioning, then congratulations to them, good for them. Overpaid agile coaches should probably go off somewhere and do something else more interesting. So to me, the best experiences have been the ones where for sure you think the whole situation is going to go to hell in a handbasket. And you think the world is going to go wrong around you. And then you wind up facilitating, and the team members actually appreciate the design of the retrospective so much that they engage and actually have smiles when they walk out the other end of the retrospective. So for me, the best experiences come from a group of people who are open-minded enough to try something even though that their trust had gone down. You almost think perhaps the better question for me would be, what's my worst experience of a retrospective? My worst have been when my retrospective was one, monotonous, as somebody's already said, but two, I've had an experience where my retrospective was not well designed enough to meet the needs of the people in the room. And then I didn't have fun that day, and I walked out, and I went and had a drink afterwards, and I went and had a cry afterwards, and then I grew up. Okay. I'm interested. So part of what I'm curious about, I've been curious for a while about what are the common anti-patterns? Why is it people stop holding retrospectives? Why is it die? Monotony was one of them. Nothing ever gets better around here was another anti-pattern we've already mentioned and discussed. Too many goals or actions is another one. I would max out maybe 2 actions per sprint. Otherwise, you're going to suffer from something I've heard people call boil the ocean. We tried to change everything in the last sprint. Improvements noted, but never made. Oh, yeah, the management doesn't want items to be experimented on. Yes, that's an interesting challenge. We need 1.5. Yeah, okay, so I've got 2 and 1. So in big companies, management doesn't want to have items experimented on. Okay. You might well benefit in a situation like that. This is not one I'm overjoyed to share. You might benefit from using a retrospective tool called the Circle of Influence. The Circle of Influence asks you to look first at what's directly in your span of control, then what's in your circle of influence, and then what's beyond that. And that way, if you find an experiment that's outside of your influence, let alone your span of control, then you know in the short term that's not going anywhere. Of course, ultimately in Scrum, who is ultimately responsible for actually working on the management to solve the management problem? Who's going to earn their pay by nudging management? It's a Scrum Master problem. Okay. And anybody who's Scrum Master should have typed in it's the Agile Coach's problem and hoping they could bump it on one. Scrum Masters, do you have allies in your colleagues and friends, the product owner? And yeah, nice, enterprise Agile coaches. So what you're really doing is you hired the tryScrum people to come in and help you. And so you're going to throw it over to them to actually solve the problem for you. Nicely played, nicely played. No, unfortunately, I'm going to suggest to you that what should happen is the Scrum Master for Team A, presumably if you're in a large enough company, then you've got more than one Scrum Master going on. If that's the case, then multiple Scrum Masters should work together, not in a gang, but in a group of friends. And then you slowly but surely invite management to start actually trying things. And then we're starting to use Agile for organizational change. Okay. So next one on team questions, why we need 1.5 hours for a retrospective. So let's do it in 30. Crazy idea for you, my friend. So I believe that was Raul that asked that. But I'll say that the one advantage of the Q&A is it makes it clear who asked the question. So Raul, so your team says, why do we need 1.5 hours? So don't tell them what you're doing. Make sure the space is available to you for at least an hour. Design your retrospectives to be so much damn fun that they don't notice time go by. And this time around, maybe you won't get them engaged for an hour, but could you design a decent 45-minute retrospective that would be fun and engage them? If you have, congratulations. A couple of times later, you've made the retrospective a little bit better. Could you design an hour-long retrospective now without them really noticing them, get them hang around a bit longer? The whole 1.5 hours for a retro in a 2-week sprint, don't see it as a statement from some deity. one must do one's retrospective for this length of time. Think of it as a guideline. Hold the space open. Make it possible. If you do, eventually your team members will actually gain joy and have fun. Okay. And lastly, in the same line, and it will actually touch on the next gentleman's question as well, you have to make sure the action items get picked up and worked on. Now, our friend, I see the remote question in the chat. I'll do this in a moment, but first I owe the gentleman Mohammed how to take action items identified by the Scrum team during the retrospective that is related to the organizational policies and procedures. Well, I'm glad to hear that in the world that Mohammed lives in, the simple stuff is easy, and now we're working on the hard stuff. So the first thing you should check, so your team is struggling and it's got an org issue. We have to check, there's sometimes when we attack these problems, we attack them and we sub-optimize. Can we all imagine if you make a change, to an organizational policy, it may solve a pain point for your team, but make life more difficult for everybody else around you. So the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that the pain point is a pain point globally and not just locally inside one team. Now, the bigger thing, and this is probably beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here, is how do you take on organizational change? I think a current that has come through in a lot of different people's approaches to this is, if Scrum is something we expect at the team level, management have to run the moral equivalent of an improvement system like Scrum at the org level. Otherwise, it's a slightly funny game. Your managers expect you to do Scrum at the team level, but your managers don't somehow think that you are that they are subject to improvement themselves. So you will find a fairly rich supply of this in the world. I don't know the tryScrum people well enough to know which one they favor. I have my own org agile approach. It's on my website. I'm sure you could figure out my approach to organizational change. The people, organic agility. So Agile 42 has a model for organizational change called organic agility. Some people in Austin, Texas, whose name is going to Agile Velocity, that's their name. They also have a model like this. But all of us have a model, something like management need to have a queue of improvements. Management need to have a list of experiments that they're prepared to run at any moment in time that they are going to take on to improve the system in their organization. And then Mohammed's question is just a question of Mohammed's team found they had a problem. So Mohammed's team, having checked that it was a problem for a couple of other teams, asked the organization to start running an experiment around changing a policy or a procedure. And a massive, massive hint, tell everybody they're running an experiment, because nobody can object to an experiment. If you run an experiment, everybody has to be on board these days. Okay. If you get really far and really deep into this, yes, like a backlog experiment that needs to be visited along with the leadership team, that's precisely it. So if you get really deep into this, there are some books on organizational change that we could share afterwards, okay? Now, I owe somebody a question on how to do retrospects remotely, but somebody asked the question, if sprint duration is every 2 weeks, can a retrospective be done by combining every 2 sprints? Or should it be done at the end of every sprint? Well, let's just ask the question, how often would you like to improve? A retrospective done well is merely a team improvement tool. So, if you would only like to improve once a month, then please hold your retrospectives only on a monthly basis. I would prefer myself to improve. I seek to improve most days, but failing on that, I actually do make systemic efforts at least once a week to hold some event with myself and the people around me to make sure I improve systemically on a weekly basis. So Agile Pain Relief does not do Scrum because it doesn't apply to running a small business with very few full-time staff. But Agile Pain Relief, which runs something closer to Kanban, runs something like a retrospective at least once a week. And now back to the wonderful person who asked a moment ago. So there's somebody up here who asked a question, how to do remotely. And I assume, AN, you were asking how to do retrospectives remotely. Yes. Okay. So I assume you have met tools like Mural and Miro, and even better, if you can stomach the license fee, there's actually a dedicated retrospective tool. I don't know if Arun's found it yet. There's, I can't recall its name immediately. Random Retro, that's free. No, there was a dedicated retrospective tool. It costs a noticeable sum of money, but here, let me do my screen share. Mentimeter is a useful tool, yeah. So for me, I'll do my screen share again. FunRetro, I think FunRetro is the one I was thinking of. So I just need to find a way in the poll everywhere, FunRetro. So you look at my mural here. I took two fairly well-known retrospective tools, the Sailboat and the same of, more of, less of, the Starfish, and I threw them up in Mural. And I bet that many of you, if you're careful, you could probably stay inside of the free license costs for either Mural or Miro. And if you did that, and Jamboard works well, yes, and TeamRetro.com, yes. So everybody's these are starting to come out of the woodwork well. For my personal tastes, if you don't mind making a bit of effort on your part in the setup, tools like Mural can work well. I like Mural and I like Miro because both of them allow you to go and change the style. It's just a matter of putting new pictures in place and thinking up new activities. The problem I have with a tool like FunRetro.io and a lot of the other ones is that they have about 3 activities. And they work really well the first 6 times you use them. And then your team dies of boredom. Klaxon, Raul, thank you. You're a genius. I've never heard of Klaxon before. Okay, I'll have to stop the screen share. Otherwise, it's going to be embarrassing when I click on all these links. I think somebody, our room will have to go. Somebody is dealing with a raised hand. I think one of the tricks with remote retros is, please realize pretty quickly, the hard part with a remote retrospective is not varying up the activities. That doesn't change. You must vary the activities. The hard thing with a remote retrospective is reading the energy of your people. You've got 6 or 7 team members on Zoom, or maybe you're using MS Teams or one of the other platforms. How do you know if they're happy campers? How do you know if they're engaged? What tricks are some of you using today to figure out whether or not your team members are engaged and you're facilitating well? Mood meter, yeah, nice, okay. Check in with them using smileys, okay, yeah. Related to Raul's check-in using smileys, I've done one that can be a bit funny and fun. I give everybody 30 seconds to type something in that represents their current mood or situation, but I only get them to hit enter all at the same time. Here's a quick check. I would like you to take 30 seconds to figure out what is your current level of engagement back at work. Let's not talk about a webinar. It's 6 o'clock at night for you guys, not for me. So take 30 seconds. What's your engagement level at work? Hit enter, type, and we're going to hit enter when I say hit enter. Hit enter now. Some are goodish, one's excited, and one's on a check-in back at work. But so this was a quick and dirty check-in model. Mentimeter rocks. And Mood Meter, I don't know Mood Meter in particular, but a lot of these tools rock, but sometimes your team don't want to navigate to yet another link. I give you a quick and dirty way to facilitate that. Just type in the chat window. Okay. What else is difficult about running retrospectives remotely? Other than what do you do with the index cards? Nothing else is difficult about running retrospectives remotely? Some people don't speak, okay? It's easy to miss out somebody who might not have engaged. So, what could you do as a facilitator? Internet issues, yeah, that's a tough one. I'm for the internet issues, I'm really sorry I don't have a magic trick. If you have internet issues and before you think it's a unique problem to where you live, you'd naively think that North America has perfect stuff for all of this stuff. I get into attendees dying in workshops from time to time where all of a sudden their computer falls off the internet and they have to phone in and let us know that they're not trying to run away from the workshop. They are actually live participants still. When I'm running a retrospective where I think I might have quiet people, I lean very heavily on Post-it note type tools. I ask everybody to write me a minimum of 3 Post-it notes. And then it's pretty easy to count the number of Post-it notes. You don't know who left what, but you get a pretty good idea that everybody leaves something. Another trick to make sure that people speak is create a speaking order and make sure that the people like me who are loud are last in the speaking order. You can't do it every time, but if you do it from time to time, it makes the loud people like me go last. Another trick offline, if you have a good relationship with the loud people, you ask the loud person, you privately coach the loud person like me. I assume you've all met loud people like me. You ask the person like me to coach, to work with you to aid the quiet person in having better voice. Not by taking action, you just ask them to take notes. It's a very funny trick. What you're doing is you're getting the person like myself to pay better attention to the person who's quiet. And by doing so, the person who's quiet has more people who are thinking of them and giving them energy. And sometimes that aids them in opening up. A person finishing registering a comment to nominate a colleague. Yeah, I like that. Nominate colleagues to go next. You have to be that one can work well as long as it doesn't make anybody feel picked on. So it has to be permission based. And yeah, Raul shared that he once had a baby crying in the background. I hear you, but I have a funny approach to that. So in regular workshops, I have a rule for people. And the rule is life is going to happen. We're all working from home. It's all a somewhat weird world. We're all doing it for all the right reasons because we want to make sure that few people die from this nasty thing that's going around. Babies are going to cry in the background. I've said to everybody in every workshop, I expect to see at least one kid come and ask their parent a question. I expect to hear at least one baby crying. In almost every workshop, I see at least one spouse hug or kiss their partner. And my point is, good for you. It's nice to see humanity exists in this somewhat weird time. I'd rather see your kid crying in the background while we're running a retrospective. It might be stressful for you, but don't feel more stressed because your colleagues are hearing it. They should feel joy. So I try to disarm it with a bit of humor if I can. And yes, with Raul, I agree with you. When you are facilitating a larger group retrospective, it's going to be harder. You're more likely to miss people. So if you're facilitating a larger group retrospective virtually, then you're going to need a couple of partners in crime. You're going to need a couple of co-facilitators whose job it is to pay attention to the energy of engagement level of subgroups. Okay. I didn't have a prepared start. I didn't have a prepared end. I wasn't aware that I was going to need slides. I incorrectly assumed that this morning was going to be a dialogue. So I'm going to check in and see how many, are there any remaining challenges? Given the rough sense I've given you, are there any remaining challenges that you have out there? Knowing I will publish in about a week and a bit's time an ebook on the subject. I'm not selling to you guys because I can't imagine any of you work on North American time. So any of the follow-up emails that you would get from downloading our ebook aren't going to be an attempt to sell to you.
Okay, so Mark, if you like, I would like to have a quick dialogue with you.
Please do, my good sir.
Especially on the retrospectives. We know that the process and delivery improvements, people would definitely be coming out and speaking, but what I find really difficult is people problems. When there is a dysfunction and if there is somebody who is going to take over the team, those kind of conversations are crucial, and that has to come out of the retros, right? Based on your experience, are there any tips that you would like to give? How can you surface or enhance transparency so that people can talk very openly about people problems in retrospectives?
Well, first of all, you can't always do that. There are going to be some people problems that won't get spoken. I've got there's a company I'm working with, or an organization I'm working with at the moment, where the people problems have become so deep that it's a retrospective alone is not going to rescue it. In fact, that team, my suggestion to them is consider a hard reset. If that team's going to make it, they're actually going to have, the Scrum Master is probably going to have to step up in that team and say, I acknowledge that we're in a low trust situation. I acknowledge that some of my past behaviors have probably caused the low trust situation. I believe I'm aware of my past behaviors. I'm willing to make a change. Are you willing to make that change with me? That might not cure it, but that might at least give everybody an opening to have a dialogue again. So there's something, I think I don't know about you, I can't imagine, if you're at low or no trust, I can't imagine having dialogue in a retrospective that's effective at that stage.
Yeah, especially value retrospectives, if the values are really bad, then that might open up, the value would eventually take people toward talking about why this value is really bad.
Okay. I've done ones, so I would always prefer to go in with a light touch. So part of what I'm thinking about in the ebook is there's a ladder of inference. On the ladder of inference reminds us that most suppositions we have are actually based on faulty assumptions. I assume X, and because I don't know, the classic one, somebody comes late to a meeting and they tell you why, and everybody in the room hears the same words. Fred was late. They were late because of traffic. Okay, and everybody in the room 4 or 5 words and everybody in the room places a different interpretation on the same events. 2 of you think Fred should have left earlier. Fred was an irresponsible member of humanity who failed to leave his house at an appropriate moment in time to honor the team. Might be right. 1 of you is aware that Fred has a newborn. Fred's lateness in the situation may in fact be that the newborn was giving him and his wife a hard time, and so he spent time with his wife, helping his wife make it through the morning. He then got caught in traffic. You have a different perspective. So my point, I won't belabor it, but my point is when we've got difficult people problems, many of them happen because we don't actually view the world in the same way. So I want to tread lightly when I'm delving into them, because if I don't, we're likely to blow up in each other's faces because we completely misread each other. And the misreadings are logical outcomes. They're outcomes that if you look at what other people have said over the life of the team, each person's misreading of the situation is valid and correct in their own context. I then prefer data if I can possibly get data. Data helps. Data takes a lot of emotion out of situations. It doesn't. I'm dodging so far. You beat me up after this. Venkatash gonna get on the Scrum Trainer's mailing list after this and say, Mark doesn't answer hard people problems. He's correct. But my next point would be, where I can, I prefer data, because data takes some of the pain out of the conversation. But at the end of the day, there's still human emotion. So we got the data, and we know we can't talk about the worst problems, but in the middle, there are still human problems. And then we have to ask ourselves questions. How can we put ourselves in other people's shoes? So outside of retros, I've used a technique. It's not perfect, but it gets a distance. You have a position and I have a position on a subject. This is actually left over from debating club, if you ever did debating club in undergrad or high school. I'm going to get you to argue the opponent's debating position. And then when you're done, they are going to argue your position. Whether or not you actually argue their position or not doesn't matter. It's very funny. The very act of taking the time to reflect on the other party's position and why they're thinking that way and what might motivate them actually causes them to have greater empathy for your own position. Sorry, their position, not your position. That was poorly phrased. What other people problems are we dealing with? Are people in India so different from the North Americans? I think not.
Of course, a bit in terms of culture, the way they speak and how they put across the boards.
One teammate not pulling enough work. Okay. But are they, well, but let's have some fun with that. Are they really not pulling enough work? So, why might a teammate not be pulling enough work? They might have something going on in their personal life. Maybe we should just respect them and honor that and allow them to recover for a period of time. Maybe they're not pulling enough work because they are not currently skilled enough. And so they're a perfectly decent member of humanity, but their skills don't allow them to do the work at the rate you would expect. There is a possibility, and it's not a zero possibility, there is a possibility that they're just a lazy member of humanity. But my leaning is always to assume it's either a personal issue or a skill issue, and to work with them privately one-on-one before assuming it's a not pulling enough work issue. I'm assuming good Scrum Masters generally hold some form of a one-on-one session on a regular basis with their team members. So my Scrum Master should already have a sense if there's a personal issue going on and the personal issue is harming the team member's ability to do work. I would expect my Scrum Master to have a sense of that. What other people issues? And I'd be careful. So I would shade it a little differently than Venkatash. I'm not entirely convinced I would want to delve into deeply personal issues in a retrospective. If I thought that it was going to be a personal problem, I might want to give somebody the time and the space to collect their thinking and reflect on things outside of the place, outside of the retrospective. Yeah, so my point to you, so the person said, so how can we get this openly out in a retrospective? So let's make this about my mythical Fred again. I hope nobody's named Fred. Okay. Arun's quickly checking the attendee list to make sure that nobody's named Fred.
There's no one Fred, yes.
Okay, so we're not insulting anybody. I create mythical characters, and all of my mythical characters are named for people with the intention that they couldn't possibly be real, so that I don't harm any real humans in saying this. Let's make my mythical Fred. My mythical Fred is not pulling enough work, but the failure to pull the work is not a personal problem, and it's not a motivational problem. It's a skill problem. That might come out in the retrospective because that's a data problem. Data will make it clear that work is not getting done. So let's imagine we've got data. You're looking at your cumulative flow diagram. We see that test stuff isn't getting tested at a fast enough rate. Fred is our tester. What would a great team do in that situation? We can all pile on Fred and tell Fred he's a bad human being.
Arun, I think he's frozen. You got cut.
I guess it's not mine then. That it was mine. Okay, we have time as well. So okay, thanks everyone for joining. I guess I'll thank Mark personally over an email. And we had a good time in talking about retrospectives. We started off with how the retrospectives were, how to engage retrospectives, tips and tricks. Yeah, and at the last, we said no assumptions, stay curious. So with that note, thanks everyone for joining. Hope you'll have good retrospectives and try to do a lot of experiments in your retrospectives to get as many outcomes as possible. Good luck for you guys. And we have webinars coming up. You can visit at tryScrum/webcast and you can register now. Thank you for now then. Thanks everyone again for joining.